understand the importance of vitamin D on your health, let me show you this example. This represents a DNA strand. Yeah, I know it looks like a shoelace. And at the end of your shoelace, you have an end cap. So this end cap on this DNA is called the telomere. And like shoelace caps, it prevents your shoelace from getting all frizzled. So in general, you will have 2 telomeres, one on the top and the bottom end of your DNA. And we can actually measure your telomere length. It's actually a marker of aging. And as you age, your telomeres will get shorter and shorter until one day there will be no more. And as your cells divide, that's how the telomeres go away. And when the telomeres go away, the DNA gets all frizzled like this. And that means the end of the life of the cell. So if you took vitamin D every day, you would slow down the shortening of these telomeres so that you don't get too frizzled so fast compared to people who didn't take vitamin D every day. And this is just taking a low dose vitamin D shown in over 1,000 people who were followed in about 4 years. Now, we don't know if this means that those participants ultimately live longer. That requires other studies. And your health is not just dependent upon your telomere length, but your DNA controls genes to be turned on and off at the right times. That is controlled by a process called methylation. And guess what? Vitamin D receptors literally line the genes on your DNA to turn off and on genes because it influences methylation. So vitamin D can reverse DNA methylation. And low vitamin D levels actually has been known to reduce tumor suppressor genes. That actually increases your risk of cancer. So vitamin D also interacts with other vitamins like folate and B12 that are also important in methylation. And the lack of folate and B12 not only gets a person anemic, but it causes DNA breaks. So when you take vitamin D every day, you're supporting your DNA. So does Brian Johnson take vitamin D every day? I'll address that a little later. And how much does he take? Well, I'll tell you that too. But keep in mind, that doesn't mean that that's your level to take. I don't think people understand the importance of vitamin D unless they grew up in London in the early 20th century. Imagine yourself walking your dog in the streets of London in the early 20th century. If you looked up, you couldn't see the sky because it would be covered by a cloud of soot from burning coal. Your clothes would be covered by soot too. The smog was so thick that literally you wouldn't be able to see your own feet. And this continued to get worse until 1952 when legislation passed the Clean Air Act. London was known as a big smoke. Air pollution blocks UVB light from the sun. You need UVB light for your skin to make vitamin D. And it blocks infrared light. That also comes from the sun. Now, we talked about why vitamin D is important. However, infrared light has its own health benefits. It enhances cellular repair, improves electron transport to boost ATP or energy production, and reduces oxidative stress to help your cells heal under stress and reduce inflammation. Infrared light is important for blood flow to improve circulation. It's important for your brain and your mood and vital for wound healing, and especially helpful to recover from surgery and burns. Athletes use infrared light for muscle repair to reduce soreness and improve joint motility to recover faster. And all this enhances your own immune system to help you remove toxins by sweating, improving your sleep, and reducing stress. There's a difference between getting sunlight for therapy and getting sunlight to get sunburn. Sunburns mutate your DNA, decreases skin healing, actually causes more inflammation to potentially cause you to blister and have scarring, and increases your risk of skin cancer, especially if you start getting sunburn at a young age as a child. And this is why it's important for you to know when it's safe to go outside. That's basically the UV index. And a UV index below 3 is safe to go out without sunblock. And you don't need to really go directly underneath the sun to get the benefits of infrared light. In fact, there's a ton of infrared light if you go seek shade and go under trees. Now today, we have infrared light therapy that you really can buy devices at home, but they're not FDA regulated. regulated. However, no one in London knew this back then. But doctors in Switzerland were ahead of the game. In the late 1800s, in the Swiss Alps, physicians were using sunlight to treat bone tuberculosis or Pott's disease. Patients were exposed to high-altitude UV and infrared light. Dr. Rollier, he opened the first heliotherapy or phototherapy clinic in Switzerland in 1903. But before Dr. Rollier, Dr. Finson was actually the first physician to use sunlight in clinical practice to successfully treat skin tuberculosis with ultralight therapy. And today, how do we treat tuberculosis? Well, we medicate people inside hospital rooms. And it's actually quite successful. But wouldn't it be better if they were outdoors? And children should be outdoors too, right? So imagine yourself as a child growing up in London during the early 19th century. You couldn't even go outside to play ball because you couldn't see the ball. Today, cities around the world still have thick smog, air pollution. But even if you live in a city with clean air, how many people choose to be indoors? My brothers have kids who really would rather spend their time indoors. And what do? They're playing video games. Now, hey, I'm not just picking on children. I've had an indoor job for decades. And as a physician resident, I would be forced to take call every third day. That means I basically work 36 hours in the hospital under fluorescent light, and then I would crash at home to sleep on the day that I wasn't on call. My vitamin D level was a single-digit number by the time I had my very first vitamin D test, which was when I had my first kid. And so from medical school to fellowship, I had the flu, I had shingles, and I had gestational diabetes. That was the unhealthiest decade of my life. And I learned my lesson. And that's why I take vitamin D every day. But even more importantly, I make it a point, a habit, to go out in the sun and take a walk every single day while the UV index is low, preferably.
Hi, friends. I am so thrilled that you want to take charge of your health and take charge of your food. Now, I know nutrition can be complex, but it doesn't have to be. And I'm here to support you in this lifelong journey. So if you point your camera app to this QR code, it'll take you to a link for a free handout that I created just for you. And if you like it, if you want to see other handouts, please go to the link in my show notes, and then you can leave me your feedback on what I could do to help you in your journey. Okay, back to the video now.
The Industrial Revolution began in the 1700s, and by the late 1800s, 90% of the children who grew up in heavily polluted cities like London, they got rickets, a disease of vitamin D deficiency. And let me show you what happens when you get rickets. This is a spatula. This black handle is hard. That represents sturdy bones. But if you don't make enough vitamin D or get it from your diet because you're not getting sunlight, you don't get UVB radiation, your bones get smaller and softer until they're so soft like the tip of this spatula that it's bending. So children with rickets are bow-legged. But I don't want to just pick on London. Rickets has been around for eons. And we know this because there are skeletal remains in ancient civilizations like ancient Egypt, prehistoric Europe, and Roman Britain. The first documented description of rickets was by a physician in Cambridge in 1650 that describes children with soft, deformed bones who lived in crowded, polluted English cities. And he recognized that it was related to poor nutrition, the lack of sun, urban living. But he didn't know it was caused by a single vitamin deficiency, vitamin D. So if you don't have access to sunlight, let's say whether it's from air pollution, or you live in Alaska in the winter, or you've boxed yourself indoors, you've got to get vitamin D in your diet. And that is where dogs helped. Now, obviously, walking your dog wasn't the solution because when you walk in air-polluted cities like London in the 1900s, you pretty much didn't get sunlight either. However, in 1919, another British physician, he started testing for rickets. He basically kept dogs indoors to see what happened to them. And dogs, too, started getting rickets. because they also need sunlight to produce vitamin D. But if these dogs were fed cod liver oil, their rickets went away. Meanwhile, the Spanish flu is circulating. It's crazy that Spain got blamed for the Spanish flu when the first known outbreak happened in Kansas, USA in 1918. Now, it should have been called the Kansas flu, but Spain got blamed because this was during World War I. And since Spain was neutral during World War I, they openly reported about the flu, which made people assume that they started it. And in Britain, the flu came in 2 waves. The first wave happened in the summer, and it was really not that serious. But the second wave spread during autumn, which had less sunlight, and it overwhelmed hospitals, leading to high mortality in heavily polluted cities like London. Do you see a pattern? Now flash forward to 2020. People with higher vitamin D levels did better during the virus of 2020. But when we gave people vitamin D, it didn't help. And areas that had higher UVA exposure had lower mortality. And the other thing is people with darker skin, Black people, people of South Asian descent, and Hispanic people, they all experience worse outcomes. They had higher infection rates, higher hospitalization rates, and higher mortality. Now, the thing is, when you have more pigment on your skin, this means you have more melanin, which blocks UVB rays and reduces your skin's ability to make vitamin D. Studies show that Black and South Asian populations, they significantly have a lower vitamin D level than other populations, especially if they live in the northern latitude countries like the UK, Canada, and northern United States. And when you have vitamin D deficiency, you are weaker. Your immune system is weaker. You have more inflammation and a greater risk of severe respiratory infections and cytokine storm. When you live in high latitudes above 37 degrees north or south during winter and fall, you're not going to be able to make vitamin D on your own because you're missing sunlight. These are places like Boston, London, Toronto. You need to take a supplement during that time. UVB rays are the strongest between 10 to 2 a.m. and cloud covers, air pollution will reduce UV radiation by over 50%. And if you have both, it's even worse. And when you put on sunscreen, you block 99% of UVB rays that dramatically reduces your body's ability to generate vitamin D. So sure, sunscreen can help prevent skin cancer, but it also reduces your body's ability to make vitamin D and increases vitamin D deficiency. If you're older, you simply have less 7-dihydrocholesterol in your skin, which reduces your ability to make vitamin D. So by age 65, your vitamin D production declines by 50%. Vitamin D is a fat-soluble vitamin. So if you have a lot of body fat, your body fat is trapping that vitamin D, making it less bioavailable. The more fat you have, the more you trap. It's like putting your money in a CD. It's trapped there and you don't have access to it daily. You have it, but it doesn't help you on a daily basis, which isn't a good thing when you need your money, your reserves, your vitamin D. And that's why if you have a lot of subcutaneous fat, that fat that you can pinch in your love handles and you know who you are, then you may want to consider getting a vitamin D level because you'll have less circulating vitamin D hormone for the rest of your body. And this is true even if you get adequate sunlight or an adequate intake. Now, vitamin D doesn't require just sunlight to make. You also need healthy livers and kidneys, which turns vitamin D into the active form. And even if you supplemented, you still have to absorb the vitamin D. And there are many malabsorption syndromes like celiac or Crohn's disease that, if left undiagnosed and uncontrolled, will inhibit your absorption of vitamin D. But let's say that's all perfect and you're taking your vitamin D, but you're also taking medications. Medications like phenytoin, rifampin, and glucocorticoids. They actually increase the rate at which your body breaks down vitamin D. So if you're not giving yourself an ample supply of vitamin D daily, then you really affect every single cell in your body because there are vitamin D receptors in every single cell in your body. It's that important. And I wasn't the only person super deficient in vitamin D. It's estimated that 70% of US adults fall below the optimal level of vitamin D. And hopefully they're not as bad as I was. And the numbers are simply worse if you have darker skin, you're institutionalized, and you're older. Fall and winter months are worse than spring and summer. And it just takes 2 to 3 weeks to bottom out. My dad bottomed out. He had an unmeasurable vitamin D level. He was older, he stopped gardening, he stayed at home, nobody told him to supplement, and he had gone to plenty of doctors. I don't know, maybe his doctors didn't know about vitamin D deficiency, which has been known in the health books for how many decades now? I mean, these experiments started with dogs, and we know supplementation, even from cod liver oil, reversed rickets in children. And yet, my dad's doctor, none of them told him to take a vitamin D supplement until his bones were so brittle that he got osteomalacia, the adult form of rickets, fractured his spine because it was so soft it collapsed. And it literally collapsed on his nerves, requiring 2 emergency surgeries that started the trajectory of the end of his life. Can you believe that? A preventable, cheap solution was not offered or suggested to my dad. And he was seeing doctors for other medical problems, which was probably all related to the fact that he had no vitamin D. So does Brian Johnson take vitamin D? You betcha. He takes 24 different pills right before bedtime, and part of his pills have vitamin D. He takes a low dose from what I can gather from reading in his website, 2,000 international units. I've never spoken to him, and I really don't know if he actually tanked up before he went on a maintenance level, because his labs are through the roof. He has super high vitamin D levels, over 100 nanograms per milliliters, which is not in the optimal range. So how much vitamin D should you take? Well, that depends on your vitamin D level. There should be no reason why we're not checking vitamin D levels. And your doctor can simply measure that, or you can actually go to a lab and request that to be measured on your own. The goal is to be optimal. And if you're taking vitamin D supplements and still struggling to get your vitamin D levels up, could you be missing other nutrients, such as magnesium, which is required to activate vitamin D? And if you want to learn more about that, watch the next video.